right, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for being here today for another Marketers Toolkit workshop. This series is focusing on building and sharpening skills for the next level. My name is Royce Johnson, and I'm the sponsorship coordinator of the executive and networking programs at the American Marketing Association New York. And this is our fifth and last webinar of this series, which is a tactical and highly interactive skills based marketing workshop that will arm you with the tools needed to get the job done. We would like to thank and extend our thanks to the Content Marketing Institute, CMI, for partnering with us on this webinar called Story Packages, the People, the Process of Valuable Multi-Channel Content, conducted by Robert Rose, Founder and Chief Strategy Officer of the Content Advisory and Chief Strategy Advisor of CMI. Also, we would like to thank our premier partner, Greenbook, for supporting the AMA New York year-round. And finally, a special thanks to the AMA New York board and our team of talented volunteers for their continued contribution, commitment, and dedication. The American Marketing Association New York thrives in the center of the world's most influential business city, raising the profile of marketing, providing professional development and networking opportunities, and serving as a resource of marketing's industry events and news. At the AMA New York, we work every day to inspire, support, and celebrate brilliance in marketing. As an AMA New York member, you have access to the most relevant and compelling knowledge base of data, tools, and people available in New York. So I invite you to join this dynamic organization to access essential resources in our library, expand your networking knowledge through a full schedule of events, network among your peers, connect with leaders who will help shape the future of marketing, and evaluate your leadership profile by volunteering, providing expertise, and mentoring for members. And today, it's an honor to present today's content marketing expert, Robert Rose. For more than 25 years, Robert has helped marketing leaders balance the art and science of marketing and tell their stories more effectively. Over the last 10 years, Robert and his firm, the Content Advisory, have worked with more than 500 companies, including 15 of the Fortune 100. Robert has served as a chief strategy advisor of the Content Marketing Institute since its launch in 2010 and has helped guide it to be the leading global content marketing education and training organization. Robert is the author of three best-selling books on the marketing and content strategy, and the co-host of the popular marketing podcast, The Weekly Wrap, which has been downloaded more than 2 million times in 150 countries. Robert, please take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, my friend. That's lovely. I like how you got rolling there. You got really rolling there. Thank you, everybody, for showing up today. And let's talk about. You probably saw the title of this webinar and you went, "What story packages? What the hell are you talking about, man?" And what I want to talk a little bit about is probably one of the unsexiest, but quite frankly, I think one of the most important things that we do in today's world. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. When we do the work that we do, it is truly in this marriage of how do we get better at all this content we're creating for all the different reasons that we're creating it, whether it's marketing campaigns or emails or YouTube or content marketing or whatever it is we're trying to create content to do these days. And let's face it, we've got more to do than ever before. And so we started to develop a bit of an idea here and a framework for how these companies, hopefully your company, can start to scale. And this really works whether you're a marketing department of one or whether you're really trying to wrangle in and de-silo a group of 40, 50, 100 people in an enterprise group. So let's talk about that. Royce did a great job of introducing me. I don't need to introduce myself any more than that. I will tell you that I'm on Twitter at Robert_Rose. If you want to connect there, I would love to. And of course on LinkedIn as well. And I can never remember how LinkedIn does their silly URLs. So maybe I should attend that class and later in September. It starts, I want to go back a bit because I think we're in this really weird time, right? We're in this very strange world where we've begun to emerge from 2020 and we come into 2021 and we're starting to really get some momentum and get back into things. And the pressure for more and more content is coming. And I think we can learn something from the last time that we emerged from a crisis, certainly an economic crisis like this, which was back in 2008. And there was a guy by the name of James Heskett. And he wrote a really great book called The Service Profit Chain, which I would encourage you to go read. It's a wonderful book. But in that book and subsequent articles that he wrote and things that he talked about, he created this framework. And the idea was is that, quite frankly, customer satisfaction wasn't good enough anymore. And remember, this was in the early days of social media and really the expansion of word of mouth through social media, reviews, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, all of those things were just getting their legs underneath it. And we started to think about customer satisfaction. And what he talked about here was that creating a satisfied customer, basically once they had bought your product or service, wasn't good enough any longer. That what you had to do was start to look and build what he called apostles. And apostles were evangelists, people who would not only purchase your product, but then go out and talk about it, go out and make a wave about it and say nice things about it. He said, because the danger zone for businesses these days is in not what he called the zone of defection. He said, yeah, you're always going to have customers who hate what you did. You're going to make a mistake. You're going to blow it with whatever, and they're going to leave. He said the problem was in that middle of what he called the zone of indifference, which was when someone bought something from you, but they didn't do anything about it. They didn't say anything about it. They didn't buy again. They weren't really loyal. They were just sort of satisfied with what they did. He said, so the goal of us as marketers and businesses these days was to create what he called apostles. And I think that we have now evolved into this idea, now that marketing has begun to really expand its remit over the entirety of the customer life cycle, we have to take that same approach at the top of the journey as well, the beginning of the customer journey. It is no longer good enough to simply answer questions or be the giant FAQ of our industry or just satisfy a visitor with information on our resource center, our blog, our website, whatever it is. We actually have to start creating and connecting digital experiences that create fans, that want that next best experience, that want to subscribe to our email newsletter, that want to share what it is that we do on social media. We have to create these fans who will not only like what we're telling them, who will not only get value out of what we're telling them, but will take action. And so in this idea of creating this kind of content, the amount of this kind of content we're going to have to create is daunting. Because quite frankly, if we're going to create those fans, we have to do so in a way that creates exciting, educational, valuable, wonderful content consistently so that we can keep them engaged. Because quite frankly, when we look at most businesses, if we're honest with ourselves, most of our content, 90%-ish of our content, sits right in there in what we call the zone of passivity. Yeah, you send email to your 10,000 subscribers, but they get value out of it. They like it, but they don't do anything with it. They just sort of, thanks very much. Our website is very informative, but not terribly meaningful in terms of what they're going to do with it. They sit here. All of our channels sit in this zone of passivity, and that's a really dangerous place because it basically just creates average. It just creates this apathy with our audiences who, yeah, they're there, but they don't do anything. They don't actually do anything. So we have to elevate the quality and consistency of our content in order to meet that. But how do we do that? I mean, goodness gracious, we're already busy. We're already frightfully busy when it comes to this. Sales wants more content. Demand gen teams want more content. The C-suite wants more content. How do we scale this quality? Because quite frankly, in most businesses that we talk to today, we've quite frankly hit a content wall. And in our research that we do every year at CMI, we see this 84% of the businesses that we speak to outsource some part of their content creation process because quite frankly, they just can't handle it. They just can't keep up with the demand of it. And most of it is sitting in that sort of average. It's good, but it's not amazing. It's not great. It's not moving the needle when it comes to that. 8 out of 10, what we find is that they're outsourcing the creation. And then 74% say why? Because they're navigating all these different needs, the silos. Sales needs a different piece of content. The C-suite wants a PowerPoint presentation and a speech. These guys, they want some sort of video. Where are we on video? I don't know. We don't know how to do video. Where are we going to do video? I don't know. We got to figure it out. And all of that is just sort of circling around in our heads as we try and keep up with this demand as we try and get really good at it. What that's starting to do, we can see this. And by the way, a National Association of Advertisers actually did some research on this, and you can see some other studies on this as well, is that driving us to build bigger teams. We're building these in-house teams, and content is the primary source of that. So we're saying, yes, add more resources, but it's not working out very well. When we add those resources, we can see that content is the driving force there. 78% of client-side marketers have moved or have moved in part to some level of an internal agency to provide content-related services, content creation, content production, all those different things. Now, this strategic service that, quite frankly, has most commonly moved from the agency to the in-house idea is content-related services. That's good in a way. We're starting to get recognized as being an important piece of the business. But quite frankly, when we look at it, the biggest drivers of this are cost efficiencies, our institutional capabilities. And so it's one of those things where, yeah, we're building a factory, but we really don't understand what the factory is supposed to do yet or how it's supposed to work. Put really simply, we don't know what we're doing yet when it comes to content as a strategic function. Hiring an agency to build really cool content things, that was interesting. And it was interesting back in the 1980s when we looked at, Apple building, hiring a movie director, Ridley Scott, to direct a commercial, and it's awesome and it changes the culture and it's amazing. But brands are now feeling like we've got to build this capability on our own. We've got to be able to do this. And we see companies like Red Hat Linux killing it when it comes to building an internal capability. So what's our problem? What's the big problem? Well, what we find is that there's still a conflation. And the conflation is, and this is really important, this is maybe the most important thing that we are seeing out there today, is that there's no true media model. In other words, we still think in the classic way of saying, I need a container first and then content. We think all about making containers of content. And we're trained, by the way, as marketers to do this. We're trained to say, I need an ad, I need a white paper, I need a blog post, I need an email campaign, I need a website, I need a landing page, I need a white paper. Great. Now that we've defined the container, how do we put content into it? And we have to reverse that thinking. When we think about the media model and when we say stuff like we should operate more like a media company, it's not that we market more like media companies. Media companies, quite frankly, aren't that good at marketing themselves. What it means is that we treat the production and asset that we create called content in the same way that they do. And one of the primary differences is there is saying, let's develop the story, the content first, and then figure out all the different containers that will be appropriate for that story. And switching that thinking means basically adding in a strategic component to the way that we look at the strategic asset called content. And our research is showing this, right? Where we say, do you believe that content is a strategic asset? Absolutely, yes. For, yes, a little, or yes, to a strong degree, 90% say, sure, of course, content is a strategic asset. Do you have a strategic approach to managing and creating that content? No, we do not. And that's the disconnect. So how do we build that better model? How do we build that better process, whether we're a marketing department of 1 or whether we're a marketing department of 40? We've discovered that there's really a 4-step process to do this. And in today's webinar, I'm going to focus on one particular step because I think it's probably the most important part of it. One is roles, making sure that we're defining the roles that we have as content as in a strategic way. It can't just be that content is kind of everybody's job and nobody's strategy. We have to look at roles as being formal. Content is not the thing that you do when you have nothing else to do. Because guess what? I have too much time and too much money, said no marketing person ever. And so we have to make it a formal function in the business. Assign those roles. 2, integrate them into whatever operating model makes the best sense for your business. Whether it's you acting as an internal agency and supplying assets to the business, whether it's you acting as a product manager and managing a blog or a resource center or whatever it is, and integrating those so that content as a service, as a strategic function, is an integrated part of the marketing process. And 3, balancing that by adding a planning part of your process. And we're going to get into that. And what I mean by that is separating out ideation and creation of story and production of assets. And the way to do that is to insert a step into there for a content media planning operation. And then lastly, to manage that, manage the production, manage the workflow, manage the idea of how you're producing all of this content at scale. So, as I mentioned, I'm going to focus here because I think this is maybe the heart of what we're talking about when we look to scale quality. Briefly, just to cover the first two steps, and each of these could be their own webinar, quite frankly. One of the things that we say is defining the roles that are really important in your content process, the way that you're going to scale this, the people part of this. And so we've discovered that there's really roughly 5 or 6 roles that are truly important here. One is someone who is responsible for content, full stop. They interface with the rest of the business. Content director, chief content officer, content manager, content, whatever the title is in your particular organization. It's a role, not necessarily a headcount, but it's a role that's important nonetheless. Then we see things like audience strategist, voice of the audience, who can help you determine what the audience is going to be. 2, looking at content quality, whether that content is structured for SEO, for the audience purposes, and how it's being optimized in an atomic way across the organization. Content strategy, how do we do templates, SEO, translation, localization, content formatting, all of those kinds of things. Traffic managers who are managing the flow of content and its creation wherever it's getting created in the business. And then lastly, content creators who are creating all this wonderful content that we're working on. And then maybe technical folks who are helping us manage some of the technology as the technology stack begins to grow. And what we're doing is then we're building in and integrating into the rest of the organization, interfacing with executive leadership for budget, guidance, all of those things, integrating into the broader ecosystem of all the people who are creating content, from subject matter experts to agencies to the demand gen team to whoever else is we're pulling content through and making ourselves aware of all of this flow to the technology stack that we're actually working in. And you'll notice there's a big hole there on the left-hand side. And that hole is typically something that we want to look at as we start to ask questions. Because as we build this team, these people, we're going to ask these questions. Well, who is going to carry out the individual roles on these dedicated teams? Are they people in our team, or is it someone I need to hire? I'm only a department of one. So you're going to have to take on this role. You're going to have to take on this role. You're going to have to take on this role, or please take on this role, or, oh my God, I wish you would take on this role, whatever it ends up being. Then how would that team basically integrate into the different stakeholders that are at play here? Whether, again, it's people creating content just willy-nilly out in different regions, different product groups, different areas, PR, sales, et cetera, or whether you will sort of bring all of that in, making decisions about all of that. Then someone who's going to interface with executive leadership and actually, what is the reporting? What is the measurement going to be? What are all those things that we need to do? And finally, and this gets to that whole, which is who is and what is the structure of our editorial board? Now, you may call it something different. You may call it a content council. You may call it just the team. You may call it, an executive board, whatever you want to call it. This editorial board, the function of it is our step 2, which helps us get cross-functional awareness of all of the things that could get done. Because quite frankly, what usually happens is we're a content team of 1 or 10 or 5 or whatever, and demands are coming in, right? The CEO's got demands, demand gen team's got, everybody wants content assets, and we're just trying to keep up with the juggling as best we can. What we want to do is get our arms around the planning process. And at the heart of that planning process is getting everybody literally on the same Zoom or in the same room and saying, let's prioritize, manage, and plan. And we'll talk about the sort of distinct planning responsibilities of that group in just a moment. But the key is that it is a cross-functional team of all of the major stakeholders so that they're all aware of the aligned editorial calendar, the aligned campaign calendar, the aligned production calendar. Everybody's aware so that nobody's like, well, where is my stuff? You're doing all this sales stuff. Why aren't you doing any of the demand gen stuff? All of that stuff needs to get accounted for, and the content planning process is a key piece of that. And that gets us to the key piece, this step 3, which we call story packages, and really the heart of what we want to talk about in today's webinar. So when we start thinking about this, the immediate pushback is, wait a minute, you're going to insert a step in between when I say I need this asset and when it's going to get produced. And you're like, yeah. And they say, well, that sounds like it's going to slow down the process. And you're going to say, yeah, spoiler alert, it is. We're going to slow down the creation and ideation process in order to exponentially speed up the production, reuse, repackaging, and execution of content, quality content at scale. That's the key. Because the key with a story package is if we can create a big story or a thematic pillar, if you prefer, of content, then we can use that content, that story, and talk about all of the different ways that it might be expressed across different channels, across different formats, etc. Let me give you an example of this. It's a client we worked with a few years ago. It's McCormick Spices. And of course, you've heard of McCormick Spices if you're here in the US. 25 brands, 150 countries. They've got about 40 people in total, not necessarily on their content strategy team. Remember, they interface with a broader group, but 40 people really responsible for the execution of all those roles that we just talked about in content. And so they do everything, right? They've got their website that they have to manage content for. They've got a whole thought leadership blog around recipes that they manage. They've got all these other sort of pictograms recipes that they do on their grilling and barbecue sort of idea. They've got a Facebook and other social media channels. They've got a complete, almost every product has its own little mini website on Amazon. So all their retailers, Target, Amazon, Walmart, all those have lots and lots of content that they put out there. They've got a podcast on Spotify. They've got an app that you can download for meal planning that does automatic meal planning for you. They've got another app that does stuff like recipes and where you can just sort of look at recipes and how to make stuff. They've got a B2B program that does research on flavors and what trends will be in flavors. And of course, they've got all sorts of things when it comes to lifestyle content. So they do all kinds of content out there. And one of the ways that they sort of scale all that wonderful quality is to think about things in these kind of story package ideas. So if you take a pillar or a theme, very much like low carb or flavors and ideas of low carb, and the core story is the tension of how do you struggle with low carbs but still make it flavorful? How can low carbs with flavors really express themselves? Fantastic. There's a core story that we can start to build around. We can start building recipes from around the world of what low carb looks like. We can start building 6 how-to articles. We can build 3 Spanish related articles. We can build 10 social media posts, 10 product links around that core idea story, starting with one big idea and turning it into lots and lots of little ideas and expressions of that content. And all of that can be scheduled, managed, etc., so that now all of a sudden we're working not like it's already late by the time it hits our desk, but we're working ahead of time so that we're theming things. Maybe they want to do this in the summer. Maybe they want to do this as a seasonal campaign to theme all this content that they're going to be talking about across all these channels. Working to build these story packages that can then be expressed, reused, re-put into different containers as they need to. You go, okay, well, how do we get there? Like, I get that idea, big ideas turning into lots of little ideas. How do we get there? Well, that gets us to thinking through some of these campaigns. And this brings us to what we call the 4 archetypes of story. When we think about content for a minute, they typically, when we think about content, can be grouped into what we call 4 archetypes. And the 4 archetypes that we typically see are 1, what we call the performer. It's a discovery and engagement. It is only meant to build an emotion in you. Or 2, the promoter. Think of every advertisement, direct advertisement, buy now, crazy Eddie, all of that. It is about feeding needs and wants, driving commitment, but it is about promoting something, physically promoting something. 3, what we call the professor. Professor content is about interest and knowledge. Think thought leadership, think white papers, think anything that's going to teach me something, a how-to video, et cetera. It's about teaching me, educating me. And then last, the poet, which we call stories or stories and beliefs. Now, each of these gets ever more complex as we go through. None is ever better than the other. They just each have very specific purposes. And so the key is, can we start at the most complex, the deepest, which is the poet, and work our way up instead of trying to scale everything from going down? When we think about storytelling, and lots of content and webinars and all sorts of great education out there about storytelling structure and all of that kind of stuff. But the very simplest story structure that is out there is and, but, and therefore, right? It is and setting up an ordinary world, but setting up the resistance or the villain in that sort of story, and therefore our truth. That is the core element of any satisfying story that you're going to go through. Great example of this, and sorry, I'm about to spoil Toy Story if you haven't ever seen it, but shut up, you should have seen it by now. So Toy Story is, and Woody, he's the leader of Andy's toys. And quite frankly, he has command of both all the people as well as the most favorite spot in Andy's heart. But one day, Buzz Lightyear comes to town, and oh my goodness, he challenges Woody's leadership and as also the top spot in Andy's heart. And after Woody accidentally causes Buzz to be lost out there, he must rescue Andy's favorite new toy and therefore learn something important, a lesson, if you will, a theme. Woody discovers that friendship, quite frankly, is important and that becoming a leader is much more than being the favorite. It's about being the most grown up. And that's the story of Toy Story. And it's great. It's a very simple. By the way, as you start seeing and, but, therefore, you won't be able to unsee it in any story that you look at. Pretty much any movie, any great novel, all of it has and, but, therefore. But that's not the way we create content in business. The way we create content in business these days is and. Here is, and you, if you feel like doing Google Foo, you can probably figure out which company I'm talking about here. I'm not going to throw them under the bus in the webinar. But this is a real life about us page on the web at a big Fortune 500 company. We are a company and we help millions of people feel more confident in their most important financial goals, managing employee benefit programs and supporting tens of thousands of financial institutions with innovative investment and technology solutions to grow their business. And our diverse business and independence gives us insight into the entire market and the stability we need to think. And for the long term, as we deliver value for you. Are you bored yet? And we provide the financial planning and advice for the retirement planning with wealth management, brokerage services, college savings, and more. I mean, if there wasn't enough, there's more actually. And our straightforward pricing and delivers value with no account fees, no minimums to open a retail or broker account, and commission free, and even more. There's more. There's more to the more. It's just and at the end of that, you're like, what? Why do I care? You've introduced no story to me at all. And so with no story, the challenge is looking at that as a basis by which we create other content doesn't lead us anywhere. It's very difficult to package. We start adding all these channels to this and what happens, and this is all true. This is all from there. I went and looked at all their different channels. Consistency, just a simple thing, consistency. If you go look at their website, is it 23 million? On some parts of the sites, they have 23 million investors. On other parts, they have 32 million investors. That's a sizable difference. Or is it 20,000 businesses that they serve or 22,000 businesses? Social media versus the website? You don't know. It's one of the two. I know that's a nitpicky thing, but it's important. It's important to be consistent if we're actually going to drive that fanatic type of idea. How about the brand statement? Something that's maybe even a little more important. On the front page of their website, their goal hasn't changed since their founding, says their website, to strengthen and secure our clients' financial well-being. But 2 pages later, on their other part of their website, they say, no, our goal is to make financial expertise broadly accessible and effective. Or in their thought leadership, if I go download one of their white papers, it says having insights into markets. That's what's important. And so they don't even match their own brand promise throughout the different pieces of content. So why would we? Why would we actually care? We don't, ultimately. And so we can build an ecosystem, not for every project we have, not for every piece of content ever in the world, but for some of them that make in truly important parts of our strategy. So the performer, again, I just want to make you feel all it's about is an emotional stimulus. The promoter, I want you to say yes to what I have. So it's a little more complicated. Great ads have three components. A great ad has an old world where I set up the old world. Are you tired of that way that you chop onions every day? Are you just absolutely frustrated with all of the that you have to do? I give you a trigger. What if there was another way? And then I bring you the new world. The new way is this wonderful piece of Ronco equipment that I'm going to deliver to you. Every ad has sort of three elements to it to tell that story: the and, the but, and the therefore. Professor, I'm going to teach you something. Gets a little more complex, where I have a thesis and I have a challenge to that thesis. And then there are implications to that. And then I'm going to argue for this is a particular solution and give you my point of view on the world, my worldview, to teach you something. And then the poet is even more complex, where we start talking about the humans and tension and adventures and resistance and all of the different things to get me to a core truth. Now, again, we could go explore all of these in great depth and have a lot of fun talking about creativity and storytelling. But for today, this is the structure that makes things important for scaling story packages. Just a couple of quick examples to put this into your head. So the performer, examples: brand advertising, content marketing, infographics, quick social posts, a quick video to make you laugh, something provocative, etc. It's only targeting discovery and awareness, and it's really trying to just drive engagement. That's all it's trying to do. A couple of examples of this. When you think about it, it's a tease, a resistance, and a truth. That's all it really is. It's just a tease, really, giving you an emotional outlet, something to express your emotion. Two wonderful examples of this is one, the Lego commercial that happened during the Super Bowl. Fantastic brand commercial where they basically let kids write a TV commercial as a movie trailer. And then they actually went out and filmed the movie trailer. It makes no sense. It absolutely, like kids made it. It makes no sense. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. So funny, so exciting, so great. But it's basically about kids' imagination, that the only thing it's trying to do is draw imagination and joy of this wonderful thing that they explored. Or the Burger King campaign, where they actually showed a time lapse of one of their hamburgers spoiling. Yeah, it's just about one thing: to make you feel icky, but more importantly, and we can argue about their success here, to make you feel good that their stuff is organic and actually made of real food, and it will actually spoil. Again, I question a little bit of that, but it is successfully drawing out an emotion. Then we bring us to the promoter, building advertising, building promotions of our actual content or our product or our service. Attributes here: core messaging, persuasive. It is about us. It is about why we're awesome. It is supposed to drive a commitment to yes or no. It targets your needs and wants, and it drives commitment. So here it gets a little more complicated. The and, but, and therefore is all about the old world, as I mentioned, the trigger to what would make you want to change, the resistance to what make you want to change, and then finally the new world of what would actually be if you actually got into this. Some great examples of this: if you look at the recent television commercials of our friend Kevin Hart going out and talking about credit cards, very funny, drawing in an emotion also, but it's all about making you want to sign up for one of their credit cards. Because why? You get all the wonderful benefits of why Chase Bank is going to bring you all sorts of great things. It's all about making you want to go sign up for Chase Bank. Or two, if you go to iShares, and I love this, their front page, if you go to iShares and look at the front page, their entire front page is all promoter content. Every single thing there is, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do this, and they do so in a very, very clear, concise, and very powerful way. Then we get to the professor, a little more complex per se. Original research, a resource center, a paper, education, how-to videos. The attributes are: it's deep. It's got a distinct point of view. It's not simply just commodity. It has our point of view in it on what we believe about the world, and I'm going to teach you that particular point of view on the world. It's interest, knowledge, and interest, and it makes an argument for something. I am teaching you how to do something my way. This is the way that I believe it should be. And it drives ultimately deeper meaning into that. Here's an example of this where we look at the and, but, and therefore, where it's really, we have a thesis, we develop a what, What is it that we're actually trying to solve? What is the challenge we're trying to solve here? Then the how. When we're trying to figure that out, the implications, the challenges of what we're trying to do, all good and bad. In other words, if we believe that this is true, this thing that I want to teach you, what are the implications of that? Both good and bad. One of the places, by the way, where white papers often make a huge fail is I tell you this wonderful thing that I want to teach you, and then I only tell you the good things that are going to happen. I don't tell you that there are some challenges that are going to happen here if you got follow this path. And then why that's important, justifying my point of view, telling you using data, using information, using evidentiary based arguments, why this is really important, and ultimately giving you some practical steps for actually achieving it, teaching you something, truly teaching you something. You can architect that out. Examples of this, two wonderful examples. ServiceNow, which is a workflow company, and they're basically created their quarterly magazine. This won a Content Marketing Award last year, where they're teaching CIOs, CEOs, CFOs all about how workflow is saving companies hundreds, thousands, millions of dollars every year. And they do so by bringing in subject matter experts and economists to teach you all these wonderful, very deep, interesting financial concepts for workflow, for basically for what they do, which is, of course, workflow. Amazing publication that they're getting tons and tons of new leads on because they're helping to teach through this platform. Or Frontline Research Institute, software company that does ERP software for schools. Well, they're teaching these school operators, these facilities managers, how to be better operators in schools. Everything, how to hire, how to deal with COVID, how to deal with all the things that they're doing through original research in this research institute that's a completely separate platform, completely separate from their website where they sell all their ERP research. In the first year of this existence, they became 30% of the new business for the new program. And then finally, The Poet, which is unabashedly my favorite, my absolute favorite here. This is where I grew up. And I won't go through all of this because gets really complex, but story structure, whether you like hero's journey or whether you like a number of ways to structure your deeper story, the more meaningful story you want to tell, the purpose here is to change a belief, using emotional storytelling to ultimately change a belief through a human hero, through their adventures, through a resistance, not always a villain, but a resistance to get through those adventures and ultimately get to a universal truth. Now, here's the key for what we're trying to learn today. When you look at a company like Lego, right, which of course understands storytelling and emotional storytelling better than most companies on the planet, right? The Lego movie, they kind of the movie that is the name of their product. And so they understand that the power of storytelling is there. But even in B2B, a company like Lincoln Electric that makes welding torches, where they're creating an entire online digital and print platform talking about makers and how makers are actually using welding to create amazing art and create amazing things in the world. But more importantly, telling the story of these heroes like this guy that you see on the screen, who is a guy who came back from Iraq, had both of his legs blown off by an IED, and is teaching other veterans how to make really cool art through the use of welding. Very cool, powerful story to encourage other makers to get into welding as well. I put all this onto one screen because you're going to get this deck, of course. And so I wanted you to have a bit of a dashboard to see how all these things work together. The 4 archetypes against all of the different things that they try and accomplish. And the key here is, how do we do all of this? Because when they overlap, and of course they do overlap, things get a little more complex, right? When we think about where performers and promoters might overlap, yeah, emotional advertising, where we want to really tell a deeper story that draws an emotion, but actually promote something as well. Or when we're into the sales process and we're looking at where promoter and professor teaching someone that is also promoting something, the challenger sale is a great example of that, where we're actually being provocative on purpose to teach you something that you may not quite frankly agree with right now. And then ultimately, where we pro and professor crossover, we have concepts like story making, where you actually help assemble something with someone and actually make something with someone and co-create that solution together. All of those things make up an ecosystem of content, this pyramid, if you will, each of them with attributes. The key is, why does any of that matter? Because if you can start with an idea, you create this wonderful idea, you get it in the shower, you get it in the car, whatever it is, and you create that idea, well, now all of a sudden we can start working up from the poet idea. In other words, if I have an idea and I can start to fill in the human, the constriction, the desire, the relationships, and I can build a core story out of that, well, then I can much more easily build in, well, how would I teach that idea? How would I teach that idea as a professor? And if I can tell the story in an emotional way that changes a belief and I can teach it, well, now it's really easy for me to deliver an old world trigger and new world promotion aspect out of it. And if I can do all of that, of course, the emotion, pulling the emotion out of that is going to be child's play. The challenge comes when we start at the top and try and work our way down. That becomes much more difficult, and where all of those things come together. And that brings us back to our process, because if we can start to use this framework in that third step, after we've built a team, we've started to create that team and create a cross-functional planning process, that area here, this planning piece, becomes much more realistic. Because, and again, not everything's going to go through this planning process. I totally get that there's stuff that just needs to get done. There's stuff that, it's just not worth it. It's not worth it to spend that much time on it. You're going to have to do it anyway. The CEO wants it blue. It's going to be blue. It's just the way it's going to work. You're just going to go produce it. But for some of those things that are really creating opportunities for us to scale our ideas, slowing down this idea and getting into a story package can make sense, which gets us to a much more organized step 4, which is developing an overall workflow, where we say, yeah, 30% of what we're going to look at, it's the stuff we have to deal with. It's the requests coming in from the CEO. It's the requests coming in from demand gen. We know that we're not going to be able to account for everything. So 30% of everything we're going to do is just going to be that reactive stuff. Again, great. Now your mileage may vary here today. You may be going, wow, today we're 90-10 proactive versus reactive, or holy smokes, we're all reactive, or, oh, no, we have a pretty good balance. In most cases, what we find is that it's mostly reactive. And why is because we don't have the second step here, which is this planning. And so if we can start to understand all the stuff that's coming in and know that we're not going to be able to cover it all, 30% of it, let's say, and take 70% of it and move it into what we're going to call this editorial board process, where with 4 distinct responsibilities: 1, putting together the story packages, trying to figure out and explore in depth. Maybe it happens offline, maybe it actually happens in a meeting, maybe it doesn't, whatever works for you, but putting together those story packages and then figuring out all of the different containers that might be worth exploring in that story package, to say, hey, instead of 1 white paper, well, here's an idea where it could be 1 white paper plus 3 webinars plus 14 blog posts plus, and basically looking at all of those things as a bill of materials to say, let's not produce the 1 and then go back and reproduce the 2nd and the 3rd and the 4th. Let's look at one production process where we produce all of those things, even though we won't need some of them for months and months and months. In other words, let's start thinking like a media company about the way that we schedule out the production of our content versus the rollout and activation of our content, a planning process. And so we then go into production with a bill of materials for that agency or for our team or whoever's opening up InDesign and actually doing all of those things as a true production process, which of course helps us then schedule things like activation for owned media, paid media, social media, internal use, whatever it happens to be. And if we're really doing it right, it gives us the ability to then atomize all of that stuff so that we get much better measurement out of it. We can start to look at the individual pieces of content versus the containers that they live in and say, this really worked as a white paper. It did not work as a blog post. And so we can start to make better business decisions out of that. And then come back and bring that analysis back into our editorial board process to say, hey, let's do this a different way for the next big idea we have. And it's a better and more cyclical and, quite frankly, self-improving process. Quick example of this. company we worked with recently had this exact problem, right? They're developing content and they say, we're going to develop a bunch of content for our new website. And they go, great. So the brand team basically says, okay, great. We're in charge of the corporate section of the website. We'll do that. And the corporate comms team said, no, we'll do the investor site and the news center and the blog. And the product marketing team goes, okay, got it. We'll write all the content for the product section. And the web team, or pretty much anybody, quite frankly, said, we'll do the whole diversity and social corporate responsibility stuff, and we'll write all of that. Well, what happens is they create that content in silos and everybody throws it all into a bucket, and there's no story packages and there's nothing. And quite frankly, they're trying to do too many things, all of them in their own little worlds, trying to create that story that's not there. They haven't figured it out. They haven't really slowed down that process. The result, the corporate website, yeah, it's beautiful, but there's empty. There's nothing there. The investor section and the news blog, it's very thoughtful, but there's no point of view there. They're just like blah, 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 blah. It couldn't be more boring. And then the product section, fantastic, very promotional, very, very heavy with promoter content, but it's completely out of sync with the story they're telling in the brand side. And then the social corporate responsibility and the diversity is a complete mess. It's just like everybody's just putting up their own stuff. We're not using paper cups anymore, and we're running a 5K, and our CEO is awesome and really, focuses on diversity. All of those things are just a big mess. And instead, really focusing in on a story package and getting those people together in that planning process can really help. And it really did help to give them a much better consistency for simply developing their new website. This all comes together in one quick example here, which is, as I mentioned before, bringing that all together into that editorial council, where the content director is focused in and saying, I'm going to bring our content center of excellence, our editorial board together. And we as a team, we focus in 60% of our time on proactive stuff, topic pages for the website, corporate content and the initiatives, brand journalism projects. Those are going to be our 3 goals. That's what we're responsible for. Those will be our story packages. Then 30% of that will help feed all the other things in the sales and marketing channels, ads, social posts, white papers, all of the webinars they're going to do. All those kinds of things are fed by those bill of materials that they're creating into those story packages. And then they save 10% for the stuff that comes up. Anything that's coming up, like, hey, the Olympics are coming up and we want to do a newsjacking thing on that and do something interesting, or whatever it is. Managing their resources much more sanely and creating much higher quality content at scale. And with that, I'll thank you very much for your time. I would be happy to entertain any questions you've got on any of this. And as I mentioned, you're going to get this presentation. So hopefully as a toolkit, it can help you start your own scaling of high quality stories. All right. Thanks so much.
So thank you, Robert, for the great presentation. So we have one question in the chat from here from Veronica. Do you have any tips to prevent content cannibalization in different online spaces?
I'll assume for a moment that the cannibalization is coming because there's a feeling that there's nowhere else to get it. In other words, it's one of those things where in a vacuum, everything looks like an opportunity. And it's one of those things where I'm actually working with a client right now where it's one of those things where, because everything they do is based on a request that comes in, and they quite literally call it a trouble ticket system, which just makes me laugh, is that the content request form is called a trouble ticket system. They comes in via tickets, and all they do is produce content. And so everything looks equal in that system, because everything from write me a white paper that's amazing to I need a blog post looks fantastic. As you might expect, without a standard, there is no improvement. There's no good. So some of it, they're amazing. They're talented people. They create good stuff. So some of it's really great. What happens is it goes through that process, it gets published out somewhere, and then someone else in the organization goes, oh my gosh, it looks amazing. That thing that they did over there looks awesome. I'm going to steal that for my thing instead of, using, using what they gave me, or quite frankly, what I can come up with on my own. And the place where we need to get our arms around that is to start to look at it, do a content audit, do all the things that we need to do to understand what our goal is for each of those experiences, whether it's an owned one, a social one, what an email, whatever it happens to be, getting our arms around how is that content created for that channel, if it is at all, and then say, how should it be done, right? How should, what should it be? What should that channel represent? What should that channel's purpose be? And ultimately bringing that into the planning process. And unfortunately, the way that I see it mostly working is in bits, right? It can sometimes just be too overwhelming to try and do that all at once, to try and do the e-commerce plus PR plus sales plus demand gen plus customer service. It's just way too much. So start with one. And maybe this is the place to start, where it's getting cannibalized right now. Maybe that's where it hurts the most. So maybe that's the place to start, to say, let's just revisit that channel's purpose full stop and see how we might start supplying it with either better versions of what we're already creating, more appropriate versions of what we're already creating, or what sounds like at the heart of that question is something that is much, much more targeted and appropriate for it. I hope that's answering the question.
I think so for the most part. And here's another question from Nada. Which company do you think is at the forefront of consistent and relevant storytelling?
You know, I'm going to try and not lean on the usual suspects here, the Red Bulls and the Kraft and some of the, some of them. I will point to the Frontline, from a small. They're basically they're not a big company by any stretch of the imagination. Frontline. So you can just Google Frontline software or Frontline. It's not the pet stuff. They do school ERP software. And if you Google Frontline research, you'll see. The other one that I would point to is Indium. What I love about what Indium did, and they're B2B, they're heavy B2B. Indium, what they did that was so amazing was they took their core story for their content marketing and basically had it envelop their entire brand. And so they took this idea of answering every engineering question with their point of view on the world, which they called from one engineer to another. And they're, you see them a lot in case studies of content marketing. And they built this, they're a small-ish company, and they've got 23 different blogs, one for every different flavor of what they do. And it's amazing, of course, because if you said, well, who's the biggest media company in soldering? Because that's what they do, is soldering. It's Indium. But what they did was they actually used that value, the content and the story that they were creating in this blog, and they basically transformed their entire web presence to do it. So now when you go to their website, it's like, what problem do you have? We're here to answer it. They sell product, but when you go to their website, it's all about what problem do you have and how can we help solve it, basically, with our knowledge. And that's what they found out that their audience really values. And so I love what they're doing from a consistency and high-end quality standpoint. And then, of course, I would be remiss and not, mention the classics. Lego, Red Bull are doing amazing job. Monster Energy drink, I think, does an amazing job with what they're doing with content. And I'm sure there are others that I'm blanking on right now.
Sure. So, Robert, again, here we go from Francine. She says at our company, the role between communications and content is really fuzzy. How would you define and delineate the roles?
A lot of people will ask me, they'll say, what department does content belong in? And my answer to that question is yes, because I kind of don't care which department it's in. It just should exist. On our website, content itself as a word gets a bad rap these days. So you'll see a lot of pushback these days. I've seen it more recently than not, actually, where the pushback is content is a meaningless word. It's just too big. It's too broad. And I think that's silly. I think, that would mean that marketing is too big a word. Communications is too big a word. Sales is too big a word. Ultimately, the way I define content is it's communication. It's how the company communicates. Content is communication. It's that simple. And so if you start drilling down into that, That means pretty much every communication that we create is content in some form. And theoretically, we should get our arms around all of it, right? Everything from the way that we manage our onboarding, our emails, our invoices, our contracts, our sales materials, our I mean, everything that we do is content in some way and communicates to the customer in some way and creates some kind of experience. So if you take that to the nth degree, we should get our arms around all of that as a strategic process. The first and primary thing that I find is that it's usually in some part of the customer's journey that we want to start that process. And so really drawing the line to say, where is it we're trying to look and be customer centric, looking from the customer's perspective. The customer doesn't care how we're organized. They don't care where content reports into. They don't care where the product reports into. They don't, quite frankly, care about anything that has to do with our org chart. They care about their experience. And so what I always say is, what part of the experience are we trying to really optimize first? And that's where the content strategy should belong. And let's organize ourselves that way and build in the cross-functional pieces of it, because obviously they all relate to one another. And so if it's, if it's in the communications group, if it's in PR, great. If it's in sales, I've seen it. I've seen it in demand gen. I've seen it in brand, increasingly more in brand, it seems these days. And it can be in lots of different places.
Okay, great.
I probably didn't answer the question specifically, but I'm not sure there is one without knowing a lot of the details around that one company.
Right. Yeah, you just got to go into a little bit more, but you got the broad level for us. That's the main thing, Robert.
That's what that's what I'm good at. I'm good at painting with big paintbrushes. So, you ask me to operate with a surgical, it's a little different story.
So thank you, Robert, for such an engaging workshop. We're gonna try to close this one out, everyone. So thank you guys for all your questions, and we're gonna try to follow up via email and answer the rest of them if we didn't get a chance to during this. So we hope you guys learn why story packages are a new and important approach to framing your content marketing process, and how editorial groups come together and to create and help balance for content demands and case studies with companies successfully using story packages, as well as of the work of the molecular content process in order to slow down the creation process and speed up the production process. Next Thursday from 12 to 1 Eastern, join us for the Innovation, Creativity, and Entrepreneurial Thinking Masterclass and learn more about creating breakthrough ideas in a world of accelerating exponential and disruptive change. Thank you all for joining today's webinar, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. Appreciate it.